leaders are losing the ball game, metaphorically speaking, for one reason. I think there's one word that really defines the place where others outside of the realm of leadership, but obviously leaders by definition because they have influence, have taken the role of what would have been guiding the ship, so to speak. I think there are those who have co-opted the role of leadership, and they have begun to influence in directions that are extremely self-serving and in some cases downright maleficent. They have an intention, and that intention is not for the good of others, it's for their own profit, for their own control. Oh, they're leaders, and they're using this one element, this one word I'll use to define the whole process, but it's one word that we as leaders, especially leaders with conservative values, have lost control of completely. If you're a leader with conservative core values, you probably don't realize the extent to which you've lost control of this one thing. But without it, your leadership is pretty much done. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. Recently, I was having a conversation, and as we were talking through the process, this was with a particular coaching client, as we were talking through the process of developing this one tool, this one technique that every leader has to master in the realm of communication, we began to realize that some of the elements in his life, in her life, were not really being used on all cylinders, so to speak. This power, this technique, this tool of leadership had gone to the wayside of this individual's leadership application. Now, I use that only as a microcosmic recent identification for me, because in the conversation, I realized this wasn't just a solution for this individual. This is an overlay across all of leadership. Now, let me define leadership as I apply this tool, because I think it's imperative for you. And I don't even know exactly who you are. Here's what I do know. If you are a parent, if you are a school teacher on the local school board, living in a community, a shift supervisor, a business manager, a business owner, an elected official, if you're any of those things and you have ideas that you believe are important, it's one thing to espouse those ideas by saying, I believe bing, 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 and have a list of them, to have all of the bullet points put together and all of the ability to express what those values are and even how others might be able to use them in their own life, or what the value of them would be, or even how quickly you'll fire them if they don't have things like, I don't know, integrity, honesty, the ability not to steal your stuff or damage your stuff. Most people get fired over that kind of thing. But see, there's more to just being able to articulate those bullet points or put them down in a policy or write a standard operating procedure and tell people this is the way we do this. There's more needed as a leader today. And part of what's needed is this gigantic word that has been used, abused, and over-abused and stretched out to the point that its meaning is almost paper thin for a reason. And not a good reason. See, anytime you take something and stretch it far enough that you can almost see through the fibers of that, whatever that thing is, if you're making a knife blade and you put it in the forge and then you hammer it and hammer it and hammer it until it's so paper thin that you can almost see through it when it's red hot, chances are it's going to break. At some point, the stress test is going to prove that it will fail. It will not kill. It will fail when you stretch it too thin. And that's true of this one tool or technique of leadership communication, which is absolutely imperative, and that is story. Now, people have been using the word story in the last, I don't know, couple of years, 5 years, 10 years, have almost, well, for lack of a better term, bastardized the meaning of the word story. It has been stretched so thin. It has been used to apply to everything from a sales technique to a form of manipulation. But story used masterfully is an extremely powerful persuasive tool. It's also an extremely powerful way to communicate what you believe, what you mean, and what your core values are, what you expect of people. See, here's the challenge. When your story is coming from your life, and in your life you talk about the things that you've learned, the experiences you've had, you might describe yourself as a wonderful person, or you might describe yourself with all the mistakes you've made, and as you tell the story of the mistakes that you've made, all of the bad stuff in you is what you remember, what you recall, and how you sell yourself. Sometimes that's known as a victim mentality. When that belief system drives you to poverty, or to an addiction, or to bad relationships over and over and over again, you begin to repeat that cycle because you're telling yourself the same story again and again, and the story you're telling is not a complimentary or beneficial story. And sometimes a good coach or a good friend or a good therapist will come alongside you and they will help you to weave a new story into your story. And together, those woven stories become an incredibly powerful new version of you. And as you begin to tell this new story, this woven story, you see this radical transformation. I used to see myself like this, and now I see myself like that. I know that was me. My wife was the one who came alongside me and began to tell a different story about me. And almost 20 years ago now, I began to break the story in my own subconscious, in my own ability to hate myself. I've told the story before. I saw myself as fat and unlovable. And as a result, I sabotaged every relationship I'd ever been in until she came along and began to say, that's not how I see you. And I need you to see you the way I do. This new lens, this new perspective, this new story of who I was began to change who I am. The same is true of you. And the same is true of everyone that you lead. Dale Carnegie said, give a man a fine reputation to live up to, and he will. That is a powerful assignment for leaders, to be able to look at the people they work with and weave into their story the story that transforms who they are. Sure, they've had a bad past. Sure, they've made mistakes. Sure, they've done stupid things. Surely they have. I mean, they're human. It's inevitable. The question is whether or not they live in the mistakes of the past, or even the things that have been done to them, not by them. Do they live in the story only of the tragedy and the victimhood and the disasters? Do they see themselves not as a great person who's failed, but as a failure? Then your job as a leader is to bring in a narrative, a story that changes by weaving a new story with their old story. We have the power as leaders not only to change the individuals around us, but to influence on a grander scale. One example is the story of minimum wage versus unemployment. It's not real complicated math. If you were to get 40 hours a work week and a minimum wage of $15 an hour, your paycheck's $600 a week before taxes and benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, wait a minute. You're probably not going to get the full 40 hours because benefits are required to be paid by the company if you get over 33. So they're probably going to cut you off at 33. So you won't quite make 600. It'll be more like 450. But that's okay, because if you're unemployment right now, you're getting paid close to $600 a week or more than that for staying home. If you don't think that story is intentional and has a long-range plan that is way beyond where we are today, you're a little bit delusional. And I challenge you to go back and ask, what would be the benefit? Who would benefit from people leaving the workforce and staying home? What would be the benefit for everyone expecting a check to come from the government rather than to come from an employer? Who would have the most influence in their life if that was the case? I'm just saying. If you begin to ask yourself those questions, you begin to question the story that's being interwoven with your story. If you drive through any city, here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, we have Arlington, which is almost 750,000 people. And we have Roanoke, which is less than 20,000. I think it's around 15,000-ish. And both of those cities, if you drive down Main Street, every small business, especially the restaurants, but almost every small business, has a giant sign in the window and it says, "Help Wanted." And the story that the managers tell, because I've asked them, is we can't find people who want to work and are willing to work for the price that we can afford to pay them. We're losing grip on the story that you get a job based on your ability to contribute to the bottom line of the business. Because we're beginning to hear a story from decades, almost a century ago, that everyone should share in the success. Well, you do if you have a job. But everyone should share in the success is the idea of a guy by the name of Karl Marx. That the guy who owns the pencil factory doesn't have any more right to profit than the guy who puts the eraser on the pencil. And that's a flawed theory. But it's a story. And it's a story that's reshaping our society. It started in the schoolrooms decades ago. Maybe even a century or so ago. But the conversation and the stories are interwoven together, from everything like our comic books to our movies in Hollywood to the conversations that your students, your children are having with their teachers, whether it's over Zoom or it's in the classroom. And as that story continues to embed itself in our everyday life, so does our grip on leadership. If you have conservative values, the story that you're telling yourself, the story that you're telling the people around you, the story you're telling your employees or your community or your family, those stories are imperative. It's imperative that you not only know that you have stories in your life, but that you be able to look back in the incidences of your life as a leader and even before your leadership, to be able to articulate the ideas, the wisdom, the lessons that you've learned, so that when you match up with someone who's telling a horrible story about themselves, that you can interweave your story with them and bring them to a better place. That's what leadership influence is all about. I believe it's the reason that we have the privilege of being leaders. Now the question is, where do you find that story? How do you learn to take that story from your own life and bring it out in such a way that you can communicate? Well, I can tell you there are a lot of people, myself being one of them. I love to talk. I love to lead. I love to influence. Give me an open door of opportunity to communicate and I will jump through it from a distance. But I'm also witnessing an evolution in the ability to keep the attention of people that you're talking to. There's a reason this podcast is always under 15 minutes. I try to strive for 5 minutes, but I can't always get the message across in 5 minutes, and that's my own personal challenge. What I have found, though, is that many leaders, many communicators, want to tell a novel of a story. Think Harry Potter, 600 plus pages, right? Very few people can be kept in attention for that long, especially in the world of social media. But what we do find is that effective leaders have learned to communicate, like Gary Vaynerchuk, on text message and TikTok, Instagram. Some of these places where you only have 60 to 90 seconds, maybe tops 3 minutes, to articulate a story that has a beginning and an end, a close, a purpose, a meaning, and a call to action. Well, believe it or not, when I'm not teaching just leadership like this, the Story Power Masterclass is about teaching you to identify dozens of instances in your life and boil them down to 2 minutes or less. Not just boil them down, but to make them like that laser pointer or scalpel that can pierce through all of the hidden agendas and go straight to the point to drive people to action. That's what I train people to do. That's why I work with coaching clients like the one that I mentioned at the beginning. It's easy to realize that we all have stories in our life. It's easy to recognize the stories that we tell ourselves. It's easy to see when other stories are interwoven with ours, the transformation that can come about not only in our life, but in the lives of people around us. It's easy even to see where the lessons are. What's hard to see sometimes is how to boil it down, how to trim the fat, how to get to the precise point of transformation in the shortest amount of time. As a coach, that's what I do. If you feel like that's something that would help you benefit your leadership, to make you more impactful, more influential, I would love to chat with you. Just go to the bottom of the podcast. If you're on leadingleaderspodcast.com, there's actually products on the bottom of this page, on this particular blog post, that will lead you to coaching options we can talk about. There's also plenty of downloadable content on the page as well. You can just download an audio for less than $100 and learn how to do what I'm talking about. It's a little easier when you have a coach, but it can be done in other ways too. I challenge you as a leader, get a grip on the story that you're telling. Find out what those belief systems are that guide you to do what you do. Do you tell yourself a story of self-worth that's destructive, of mindset that's damaging? If that's the case, then we need to talk. If you're relaying those stories to the people around you and you're damaging their self-image, then we definitely need to talk. But if you have conservative values and you feel like your voice is being silenced, I'd love to talk to you about how your story and everyday conversation doesn't have to be something that causes people to go, but instead causes people to go, tell me more. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.